Hi again guys, and welcome to another installment of the Beards and Cars podcast, which of course you can grab in its audio-only form in the description below from SoundCloud. And for this installment I wanted to revisit something which we've talked about before. In fact, something which may well be the single most controversial episode of Beards and Cars that I have ever done in the, whatever it is now, 112 episodes, I think, something like that. And that was the subject of paid DLC in Gran Turismo. I can't remember exactly everything I said in that video. I don't recall the exact title. I think there was a Shelby Daytona Cobra in the thumbnail though. And in that discussion, I made a number of points as to why I believe it can be a good thing. And there was a huge amount of backlash over that. Things maybe that were misunderstood, things that people took issue with in particular that I'd said, or maybe just the entire concept of paying for content is something that many people do not like. But I think that now it's a very interesting topic to reconsider because now it's real. We have our first occasion of paid DLC in GT Sport, and for those who don't know, this is the news that I covered yesterday of the Lewis Hamilton Time Trial Challenges arriving on the 28th, and these time trials are basically 10 events in either the Mercedes-AMG GT3 or the Sauber C9, where you can go up against his lap times. Now, what I didn't mention in that video, because I didn't know at the time, was that arriving with that is a couple of other things as well. Apparently, if you beat all of his times, you will win some special vehicles. Don't get your hopes up too much yet as far as that goes, because I'm expecting those to be probably variations of existing cars, special liveries, that kind of stuff. Don't expect to be winning like an Apollo IE or something like that for it. But the other thing, and this is the interesting part, and the most interesting to me in particular, is that they're raising the credit cap limit in the game with this particular update, which would lead me to believe that if you don't buy this DLC, you won't have the credit cap increased. And that begs the question, when is DLC a good thing? When is it an appropriate thing to do, and when is it just a cash grab? Because my thoughts are mixed on this one. Now I will say, I'm not a fan of it. So when I say that my thoughts are mixed, they're mixed as far as I can understand some of the reasoning behind why you might charge for something like this, but at the same time, of all of the updates that you could charge for, this is a very strange choice to go with, as far as what kind of public opinion that's going to engender. Because as we've discussed many times before, the lack of communication that Polyphony has with the community leads people to make up their own narrative. And that narrative is very rarely a positive one. So unless you give people the true facts of something, your plans for the future, what you're currently working on, that kind of stuff which, incidentally, I have always tried to be transparent about on the channel. I've constantly told you guys, even from when we had 3-figure subscribers, that I do have goals for this channel, some of which I could tell you about, others of which I couldn't, and many of those have come to pass, such as the GT Sport Community Spotlight and reviewing real cars in the real world. So I like to keep you in the loop, because as far as I'm concerned, a community is the heart of what makes any business or any individual who has that position successful. Without the audience, it is literally pointless. So why wouldn't I want to keep you in the loop? That's what I've always tried to do, and that's what I'll continue to do, regardless of if it's a YouTube channel or a game. But as far as whether or not this is appropriate paid DLC, the thoughts can definitely go back and forth. There are legitimate reasons why you could support this wholeheartedly, and as I mentioned in that brief news video yesterday, the main thing that comes to mind to me is probably that they are having to pay Hamilton for his name and likeness to be in the game again. And that's probably not cheap. And although you may think, well, neither is licensing, well, at the same time, I think the fact that the licensing for cars and tracks is kind of essential to the game would mean that for now, I think they'll probably keep that free. The reason why I think this is probably paid is because it's not a necessary thing. It's an additional feature which they've decided to give to us, or sell to us, because it's just something different. It's like the moon missions in GT6, or the Senna challenges, or the Vettel challenges. Now, I get that from a marketing point of view, and more importantly from a licensing point of view, getting Lewis Hamilton's name and likeness is not cheap. I suspect it's very expensive. So that makes sense from a business point of view that they're probably trying to recoup that money. However, if you're going to do this, you've got to know that there's going to be backlash. They're not that naive. They cannot be that naive. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up again, and I think I did probably touch on this to some degree in that other video, is my stance on when DLC is a good thing, when it's a grey thing, and when it's a bad thing. Because I think there are clear distinctions. And of course, all of these are just my opinions based on what I've seen and experienced myself, so if you disagree, tell me about it down in the comments. And of course, the more reasoning that you put behind it, the more likely it will be to have a decent discussion, rather than just, no, I hate DLC, or I love DLC, give me all of it. Well, obviously those two extremes don't exactly have a huge amount of logic behind them. So the more logic you put in, the more I'll be able to work with when I respond, if I respond. So to me, the good points of DLC are actually almost one specific thing. And that is, on at least 3 occasions with 3 different games, I've come across DLC which has actually made me like the entire game more. And that, to me at least, is the single most important thing about DLC. In order to make a DLC pack or an update or a new feature really feel like it's good value and that it's worthwhile to do, it needs to be added not just in a way that gives you something new that you want, but crucially, and this is the point that I think some games miss, maybe even GT Sport to some degree, and Polyphony of course behind it, the game already needs to be good. It needs to be big, it needs to be expansive, it needs to be a game that is, for want of a better word, already satisfying. And to put that reasoning into terms that you could understand better from my point of view, the 3 games that stand out to me the most are Test Drive Unlimited, Fallout 4, and Forza Motorsport 4. To me, those are my 3 favourite examples of DLC ever, because the games were already great. Test Drive Unlimited was a brilliant game for its time. The graphics, I would say, were among the best at the time of any driving game. The physics were good enough at the time and were certainly unique, especially for more of an arcade-style game. The vehicles, the location, it was just a huge game that nobody else was really doing anything like at the time. But then, they bring out these DLC packs. But they're not just a bunch of cars for the sake of earning an extra buck. These are amazing cars that were added in those DLC packs. The Cadillac 16, the Mercedes CLK GTR, the Cadillac Cian, the B-Engineering Adonis, the Holden Effigy concept. Amazing cars and bikes were added in those DLC packs. To me, that was worth it because it didn't feel like a cash grab. The game was already massive and they were making it even bigger for the fans. And if they want to charge for that to recoup some of the development and licensing, I have no problem whatsoever supporting that. Take my second example, Forza Motorsport 4, a more conventional circuit racing professional driving game. The DLC was amazing in that game. Awesome cars, consistently every month, LMPs, classics, supercars, concept cars. I love the DLC offerings in Forza Motorsport 4, and many of them are among my favourite cars in the game, in fact. But crucially, it was already a game with 500 cars to begin with. It was already a game with dozens of circuits and hundreds of career mode events. It was already more than enough game to work with, and then they made it even bigger and even better. That is what made it worthwhile to me. And for me, my number one example of what is by far my favourite DLC of all time is, as I mentioned, a non-driving game, funnily enough, Fallout 4. I love Fallout 4. It's in my top 5 favourite games of all time, including Gran Turismo and Forza, and the game is, for those who haven't played it, big. It's really big. Now, the map isn't as big as Fallout 76, but the game is a hell of a lot better than Fallout 76 is. It's got a great story, multiple factions to work with, and of course that's a completely different podcast. But the point is, the DLC doesn't just add character skins or an extra gun, it's entirely new maps that connect to the storylines of the existing game in ways that add multiple extra days, if not weeks, to your gameplay. And they're great storylines. Now, not everyone loves the DLC in that game, but for me, I do, because even without the DLC, it's a great game. And for a long time, I played Fallout 4 without any of the DLC and thoroughly enjoyed it. But then I decided to try it, and I'm glad I did, because it makes it so much better. I would say it makes the game twice as good when you add those 3 DLC packs, Automaton, Far Harbor, and Nuka World. Some people don't like Nuka World. I actually do. It's grown on me a lot over time, and I love all of the DLC in there. But the point that I'm making here is all 3 of those examples were games that didn't, strictly speaking, need any DLC. They were already big, and were they on the Xbox, well, not the Xbox One, the original Xbox, or a PS2, like Gran Turismo 4 was, Gran Turismo 4 never had any DLC, never had any updates, didn't need them. It was already more than enough of a game. Likewise with those, Test Drive, Fallout, and Forza, they didn't strictly need updates or DLC packs, but it did make them even better. So I had no problem whatsoever in handing over cash for those great additions to the game with a huge amount of effort put into them. Now take a second example. Gran Turismo 6, and also Forza 7. In Gran Turismo 6, you can pay real money for fake credits. And although technically that isn't DLC, it highlights the point that I'm making. Likewise with Forza 7. Loot boxes. Now the loot boxes, as far as I know, have been removed from the game, but the point is, any game that has that kind of feature immediately lowers my estimation of it a little bit. And in Gran Turismo 6, it was ridiculous. It was like £45 or like $60, something like that, for, I don't know, 6 million credits in the game, something like that. And you could literally earn 6 million credits from the Red Bull events in under an hour. So £45 of real money for an hour of racing. To put that into perspective, you could literally, very literally, go to a supercar track day experience at Brands Hatch or Silverstone for a better hourly rate than that. That's insane. There's no other word for it. It is insane, and that is nothing but a literal cash grab. Now, that's not DLC, but the point remains. There is a time and a place for paid additional content. And I think that this is going to be interesting to see unfold when it comes to GT Sport, because I'm not going to give full, impending doom judgment based on one Lewis Hamilton DLC. But what I am going to say is I'm very curious now to see how this proceeds, because at the end of the day, covering the game is my job. So chances are I'll probably buy most, if not all, DLC anyway. But in a similar way to how I'm not a super fan of Spa, but was still excited for those in the community who were excited for it, I can certainly get incensed about something that I'm going to buy anyway, because I believe other people shouldn't have to. And that is what I'm curious to see. If this remains, in effect, a one-off, then sure, I won't really have that much of a problem with it. I do think that it's weird to charge for it, but if there is the licensing reasons, then that's fair enough. If, however, this progresses and it starts to become monthly updates, become paid DLC, well, then we're going to start to have problems, as far as I'm concerned, because even after 2 years, this game is still smaller than Gran Turismo 3 was, and that was on a PS2, with no updates and no DLC, just a disc. And before the mindless fanboys, and I say that very specifically because being a fanboy is not a bad thing, and mindless fanboy is a very distinctly unfortunate position to be in, and what I would classify that as is people who forgive a corporation or a company or a brand regardless of what they do. That's a bad position to be in, there's no two ways about it. I would say that for the people who like to defend GT Sport by saying, well, Gran Turismo 3 had nowhere near the graphics, the physics weren't as realistic, it wasn't on a PS4, it was on a PS2, and they weren't trying to proof the game for a PS5 release so that it would be future-proof, literally. Those are all true. However, there's this little game that you might have heard of called Gran Turismo 5, and that came out on a new console too, with improved physics, the best graphics we'd ever seen in the series, and it was future-proof. Many of the cars were used again in GT6. What's the difference? The difference is Gran Turismo 5 was the biggest game Polyphony had ever made, and the fact that it was on a new console with better graphics and better physics didn't stop that from happening. So, to say that GT Sport is justifiably smaller is simply false. And there are also many people who sit on what you could call the opposite side of the fence, where they don't want any DLC of any kind, and they want everything to be free, and they will fiercely defend all of the free updates against any criticism whatsoever, because it's free. So how can you complain about something that's free? Well, I'll tell you how you can complain. It isn't free. You bought a game. You weren't given Gran Turismo Sport, you paid for it. Or your parents paid for it, or whoever bought it for you paid for it. So no, those updates are not free. You paid full price for a not full game. So the simple answer is no, those updates are not free at all. They are simply catching up to the kind of size that Gran Turismo Sport should have been when it was released. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no two ways about that. Because Gran Turismo 5, as I said, proved that it can be done. So overall, my thoughts on DLC are, yes, it has a place. And the DLC that I would be happy with, I don't think would ever be in GT Sport. Because, as I said, the game just wasn't a full-size title compared to what the standard of the franchise was before then. If Gran Turismo had always been like a 200 or 300 car series, then it would be great. This would be amazing. But it wasn't. It's downgraded a lot. And mathematically speaking, that's just the way it is. The numbers don't lie there. And my overall thoughts on the DLC situation are, as I said, it definitely has a time and a place as far as I'm concerned. If Gran Turismo 6 brought out like a $10.99 DLC that added a couple of tracks and like 20 cars, I would 100% support it, because it was already such a big game. Not as big as Gran Turismo 5, but still big enough with 1,200 cars. Now, however, in GT Sport, it's simply not the same playing field. The game is not built with the intended purpose that the previous titles had, which is one of the main excuses that many people use to say why it's smaller. And at the end of the day, as I said, I am very, very curious to see how things pan out. As far as predictions go, I don't think they're going to be doing this that often. I hope that they don't do this that often, not because I don't want to pay for DLC, but because I think that this just isn't the game where you test the waters in that way. People are already testy enough about this game. People already are salty about GT Sport, and many players don't even play it anymore, or at least just drop in once a month to see what the new stuff is, and then start playing whatever else again. So, don't test people. If you know good business, don't test people when they're already feeling testy. Overall, though, that's it for my thoughts. Doubtless it will be another controversial episode with plenty of dislikes. But tell me down below, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you agree with some that I said? Do you disagree with others? Let's have some conversations. So overall, that's it for this installment. Of course, I will see you guys next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.